It's a mystery that is nearly impossible to answer, at least for certain. What happens when we die?
Believe it or not, there are people who say they can answer that question. Liz Habib here with stories of near-death experiences. Liz?
Yeah, the fear of death. Ever talk about how afraid you might be? The uncertainty of the afterlife. What's it like to die? It might be hard for most of us to comprehend, but people who have gone through what they say is a near-death experience actually embrace the thought of dying. When this Texas teen, Ben Breedlove, chronicled his heart condition on YouTube, he became a poster child for near-death experiences. Using just note cards, he describes 3 NDEs where he saw bright light and angels. He too says he felt peace when he faced death. When he finally did die recently from that heart condition, 1,500 people came to his funeral.
I just can't believe that when our body dies, that that's the end.
This film, Afterlife, documents people who say they've had similar experiences as they face death. Dr. Jeffrey Long has chronicled their stories, and he concludes,
we all are going to have an afterlife. Who we are is going to survive our bodily death.
Skeptics challenge all this, saying there's no proof, no evidence. But at support groups like this, people say you cannot ignore how similar the stories are. Stories told by so many people over so many years. Everyone we spoke with at these meetings says near-death experiences brought God into their lives, and they no longer live with fear of death.
The afterlife is a reality.
There's nothing to be fearful of.
That young man, Ben, has had a tremendous impact on people. The people who had these experiences were definitely touched in a way that's tangible. They're living lives, they say, that are more devout. And we found there's a common denominator, optimism about death. They're not afraid. They really do seem at peace with it. They say going to one of the meetings is a way to get over your fear of death if you have one.
I read, too, that some said they were told that they had more to do, more to fulfill here on this planet.
That is one of the experiences people with near-death experiences have, that sort of message that you have to go back and do something.
Yeah. Wow.
New at 10, a few weeks ago on the one-year anniversary of the April 27th tornadoes, we introduced you to Julie Hallmark. The 2-year-old cousin and her cousin Ari were the only survivors of an EF4 tornado that killed 5 other members of the Hallmark family at their home in Marshall County. Tonight, you will meet Ari Hallmark. The 7-year-old has written a book about her experience a year ago. And as WHNT News 19's Carson Clark explains, Ari says she went to heaven with her family that day in April, and Jesus sent her back to tell their story and to help others.
We made it because to help little kids that lost their parents like me.
Ari Hallmark could be one of the most remarkable 7-year-olds you will ever meet. Somewhere between gymnastics and finishing up the 1st grade, she's managed to become an author.
I like to read a lot. I just do it for the prizes. I don't really like to read that much. Yep.
But what adds to Ari's remarkable story is the subject of her book, which is titled To Heaven After the Storm. On April 27th of last year, Ari, along with her mom and dad, Shane and Jennifer Hallmark, her grandparents, Philip and Ann Hallmark, and her 2 cousins, Jaden and Julie, sought shelter in a bathroom to ride out an EF4 tornado. Her book talks about it all.
When we were in the bathroom and when we were in the hospital, and when we got out of the hospital.
Only she and her cousin Julie survived, but Ari says that for a while she joined her family members in heaven. She describes in vivid detail seeing her father Shane, who had been bald all of her life, with hair. And she writes that, my daddy did not have his glasses, and he did not have the marks where they were. She says an angel came to her and told her it was time to go back, and then she remembers waking up in a field near the house.
We have, before the storm, she takes a quick trip to heaven in the middle, and then the end just tells her visit to the hospital.
The proceeds from Ari's book will help a ministry for other children dealing with death. Her therapist suggested the idea.
She's like, hey, let's make a book and do it to help other kids.
But she's undecided about a future as an author.
Well,
yes.
Well, maybe it'll be a few more years.
In Arab, Carson Clark, WHNT News 19.
Do you believe in life after death? One man says he has scientific proof it is true. Dr. Jeffrey Long, a radiation oncologist from Louisiana, has written a book with his findings. He calls it Evidence of the Afterlife. Mary Jo Rapini says that she had a near-death experience that profoundly changed her life, and her story is featured in the doctor's book. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Doctor, if I can start with you. You collected more than 1,000 stories of near-death experiences from people all around the world, and you say the consistencies in those stories help prove scientifically that there is an afterlife. So based on your data, what is the proof?
Well, my research reveals 9 lines of evidence about the reality of near-death experiences and their consistent message of an afterlife.
Can you give me an example of some of those 9 lines of evidence?
Well, one good line of evidence is that those that are blind, including blind from birth, can have visual near-death experiences, not as fragments, but as fully visual impressions during their near-death experiences, just like visual impressions during other near-death experiences.
And no matter what the age of the person, it doesn't matter, the experience is the same, essentially?
My research involved a study of young children age 5 and under, and I found the content of their near-death experiences absolutely identical to older children and adults, suggesting that whether you know about near-death experiences, what your cultural upbringing is, what your awareness of death is, doesn't seem to have any effect on the content of the near-death experience.
Well, Mary Jo, you claim that you had a near-death experience.
Yes.
You suffered an aneurysm at a gym. When was this?
It was in April '03.
And you were taken to the hospital, and what happened?
Well, for 3 days they couldn't locate the aneurysm, so basically they put me in an ICU and were just monitoring me. And then one night, the third night I got very ill. And I remember they were all of a sudden rushing around me and inserting things into me and monitors. And they called my husband, and he was there. And I looked up and I saw this light. It wasn't a normal light. It was different. It was a luminescent, and it grew. I kept looking at it like, what is that? And then it grew large, and I went into it. And I went through this tunnel, and I came into this room that was just beautiful. And God held me. He called me by name, and he told me, he said, Mary Jo, you can't stay.
And I understand you wanted to stay.
I wanted to stay. I protested. I said, I can't stay. Why not? And I started talking about all the reasons. I was a good wife. I was a good mother. I did 24-hour care with cancer patients. And he said, let me ask you one thing. Have you ever loved another the way you've been loved here? And I said, no, it's impossible. I'm a human. And then it just held me, and it said, you can do better.
Were you a skeptic before this about
yes.
this? You were?
Yes, I was working with cancer patients prior to this happening. I was getting ready to move to Houston. I was probably at the lowest point in any faith. I had seen terrible things in that cancer center, people dying, and when I would go in and they would tell me they saw things, I would respond. I would just sit there, and they would say, can you see them? And I'd say, no, I can't see them. Then I would leave the room and tell the resident, you better check their morphine level.
You know, doctor, let me ask you, because, and I totally respect what you're saying, Mary Jo, and I don't doubt that you experienced what you said you did, but there is such a thing as a sort of cultural conditioning. We've all at this point heard the story about you go through the tunnel, there's the light, you meet God or whatever you want to call that force, and you're told that it's not your time. So how do you know that Mary Jo wasn't just kind of experiencing that? Maybe she was on certain drugs in the hospital?
Well, out of 1,300 near-death experiences that I've studied, Mary Jo's experience is absolutely typical of what people describe. I think if near-death experiences were culturally determined, then people that had never heard of near-death experiences would have a different experience. But we're not finding that. Whether you know or don't know about near-death experience, the time it happens has no effect on whether the experience happens or not, or what the content is.
All right, Doctor, I appreciate it very much, Mary Jo, as well, for your time. Pretty controversial book. It's going to get a lot of people talking. And the book, again, is called The Evidence of the Afterlife, Dr. Jeffrey Long and Mary Jo Rapini.
When Jeffrey Thompson checked into the hospital, he was expecting to undergo routine surgery. But there was nothing routine about Jeffrey's operation. And when he checked out of the hospital, he was not the same man.
Law practice is a stressful environment, and you're dealing with a lot of very difficult situations. I used to wake up with a knot in my stomach every morning, feeling that stress.
He just was burdened by work. I mean, it was always on his mind. You know, it was a hard thing for him to turn off on the weekends or to get away from it.
I was just focused so intently on my career that I was letting what's really important fall by the wayside.
Jeffrey Thompson's law practice didn't take just his time and energy. The fast pace and the constant stress also took a toll on his body.
I maintained that stress, and it continued to work on me, and it also continued to work on my body. And eventually it broke down. I began having stomach pains, severe stomach pains, that initially I just had no idea what it was. I thought I had an appendix rupture.
Jeffrey had developed diverticulitis, a painful condition that attacks the intestinal wall. Months of natural treatments had failed, and his condition had become so advanced he needed surgery to remove part of his intestine. But what looked like a textbook operation left him suspended between life and death.
And I woke up to a surgeon pulling a sheet off of my stomach. And as I looked down, I knew immediately something was terribly wrong. And then I looked into the surgeon's eyes, and I could see concern on his face.
He had been hemorrhaging for almost 24 hours. And they had continually given him blood, but it was hemorrhaging into his abdomen, and they didn't know it, into his stomach. It was frightening. I've never seen anyone so pale, but his lips were just completely white.
My internal clock told me that I was getting ready to die, and I only had a few seconds of consciousness left. I reached up to grab my wife. I was just wanting to tell her how much I loved her and tell her that I was getting ready to leave her.
And I went to him, and it was right after that I lost him. You know, I could tell he left. And he took my hand, and then he was gone.
And my life came to my center torso, and I began to rise out of my body up into that room. Everything was going haywire down below me. They were saying, I'm going to lose him.
They were doing everything they knew to keep him alive at that point.
It looked like it was a disaster going on, but it was the sweetest day of my life. I never had any pain, and I never had any fear.
As Jeffrey's spirit hovered above his body, a light appeared.
It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. It started in the center of the room toward the ceiling and began to filter out into that room, and I was immediately drawn to it. And as it began to hit objects in that room, color came flooding out like I've never seen before. My senses became enhanced. I could see everything in that room with perfect clarity. There was an entire dimension that we just simply don't see on Earth. I've never been more alive than I was at that moment. It was incredible. I suddenly had an overwhelming sense of God's presence, of His love, of His peace, of His joy. The thing that was just so incredible to me is how the maker of this universe, who can make the sun, the moon, and the stars in this earth and us, can come down and hold me and comfort me and love me as if I'm the only person in the universe. And I remember thinking about the prodigal son. That's what came to mind for me, that long-lost son that had gone out and strayed, and he had come back home. And his father was coming out to hold him and to love him and to welcome him back. That's what was happening to me. It's the sweetest love there is. I told him I wanted to go with him. And then I had a fleeting thought. But what about Madeline, my wife, and what about Will? My sweet wife is just falling apart down below me, and I'd never seen her that way. And I'm up here in complete comfort, in complete peace, in complete joy. And then God told me internally I was going to go back. And I remember jolting in my bed, and I opened my eyes. And when I opened my eyes, I'm looking at the surgeon, and he's saying, I'm losing him. We've got to get him back in surgery.
Jeffrey was rushed back into surgery where doctors stopped the bleeding. When he finally regained consciousness, Jeffrey had a new understanding of God's amazing love and presence in his life.
God loves you more than you've ever known. He knows your circumstances. He knows what you're going through. I used to wake up with a knot in my stomach. I wake up with joy in my heart. I know He's with me. You can't go through something like that and not be a changed man.
He has a peace about him. He's a very peaceful and very centered. He's really not fearful of anything now.
Jeffrey's recovery was long and difficult, but the peace, joy, and love of God he found on the day he faced death is now with him in everything he does.
There's a peace and a love there like I can't describe to you. And it's an entirely different way of living. I've never enjoyed living more, and I understand now what's really important. I want to live for God, and I pray that He'll give me the opportunity to continue to do that.